Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Joel Fulton,
I'm Yaron Levi, and
and
together,
together we're JaY Walking.
walking in front of the traffic of security and talking about security, leadership, and anything in between.
All while not trying to be hit by the threat bus.
Exactly. Yes, that's gonna hurt. So yeah, let's not do that.
So, Yaron, not too far in the past here, there's been a stretch of conferences.
Mhm,
So, in the first and second weeks of August, there was Mandiant's MY's CISO Summit in
mhm,
Colorado. Then there was B-Sides and Black Hat and Defcon in Las Vegas. And
mhm.
so you thought, and I'm excited to talk about conferences, these past conferences in specific, and then conferences in general.
Yeah,
So,
that's I think something that is always interesting to talk about for a few reasons. First of all, unfortunately, I wasn't in Vegas this week, also known as the hacker summer camp or security summer camp or however you want to call it. So usually I try to go to that. The two conferences I go every year is RSA, so during February, March timeframe, and then in the summer to Defcon B-Sides Black Hat around that timeframe. This year they're pretty close together, and with work and everything else, I couldn't go, so was feeling a little bit missing out. So wanted to know, like, what did I miss out?
that's great. That's great. You missed out seeing your friends, and your friends miss you.
Thank you. Yes, that's probably the biggest thing I feel like missing out is the community of my friends and
Yeah,
people.
certainly.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned something that I thought would be interesting to start with, and that is the timing of
Hmm.
RSA. Black Hat didn't change. RSA moved its schedule to January here in 2022. And I thought that was going to have an effect of diminishing attendance at Black Hat for a couple of reasons. They both fall within the same quarter.
Hmm.
And in enterprises, you typically have quarter based travel budgets. And I expect
Hmm.
many people had to pick one or the other. The other is being less than 45 days apart, people have day jobs
Yes.
and can't afford, regardless of budget, the time it takes to the conferences. And then the other thing that I found really interesting at Lucidum, we had a booth at RSA, we had a booth
Hmm.
at Black Hat, and the difference in the expectation of passersby who would engage with us was notable between RSA and Black Hat. At
Interesting. How
RSA,
so?
yeah, thank you. So at RSA, there was we're finally out. There was an excitement. And along with it came a curiosity. Oh, we haven't heard of you before. Or, oh, this
Hmm.
is interesting for me. And one of the questions that all of us at the Lucida booth asked people is, why are you here at this conference? Why are you at RSA? Why are you at Black Hat? What do you hope to gain? And then what's your plan to accomplish that goal? At RSA, we had a lot of tip of the tongue answers from folks. I am here to find a better way to manage my email security. I am here in our space to find a better way to find my own knowns and automatically protect them. I'm here to see what's
Hmm.
new in endpoint protection. That was really ready on the tip of people's tongues. It was different at Black Hat. At Black Hat, there were a lot of conversations that were, well, I kind of come every year that I can. And when we spoke with people, now Lucidum is smaller than, say, Palo Alto
Hmm.
for now, and we spoke to people, they came with an expectation that if they had seen us at RSA, not much had changed. There was almost a lack of curiosity. I mean, I just talked to you 45 days ago. How much could be different? What is it you could show me
Right.
now? And as a smaller company, there were a great deal of areas of value we can show them that we've been iterating on with customers. But the expectation was not much has changed since 45 days ago from most of the booths that we're meeting with. And I
So
thought that hurt Black Hat.
interesting, which I'm curious about. So why did people come, especially now, like you said, 45 days later? And it wasn't that long ago, and within the same quarter or whatnot. And yes, to go and convince your boss, I have to go again to yet another conference.
Yeah.
Um, what was the reason? So why did they come? Why
in
do we don't come back?
in asking folks,
Mm-hmm.
people really struggled to answer. But when we got down to it, many people said, "Well, I mean, it's Black Hat." Like I felt like if I didn't go, I wouldn't be checking a box. That was pretty
Yeah.
important for me.
I'm also curious. I wonder if it's different. Do you see the same people for the most part, or is it um, some group or some type of crowd go to RSA and then another different type of crowd go to Black Hat, and do they mix?
Good question. So based on our interactions with folk,
Mm-hmm.
one, there was a significant decrease in total population that went to Black Hat.
Okay.
So, and that was a decrease not only compared to RSA, but according to organizers in comparison to years prior. Two, I think if I were to put the job descriptions of folks and measure them,
Mm-hmm.
there were a significant number of venture capitalists at RSA.
Interesting.
Significant, notable. There were a large percentage of leaders at RSA. Titles like head
Mm-hmm.
of chief info officer, chief infosec, head of cloud. There were more there.
Mm-hmm.
There were fewer, not none, but fewer that were operators. I do this for a living. I'm not a director and an individual contributor. There were fewer of those at RSA. And I wonder if the resulting population mix that we encountered at Black Hat, there were very few VCs. There were almost no heads of, chiefs of. There were small business owners. I saw more of those at Black Hat, but the buyer at an enterprise was not well represented at Black Hat, and there were a large number of individual contributors. And I wonder, I speculate, hypothesize that those folks had come and they'd stayed for 8 days and they'd done B-sides or some pre, and they're going to do Defcon, and Black Hat's just kind of the sandwich in the middle. I wonder whether that's a valid hypothesis.
Yeah, that could be. I also, in past years, when and then the reason I'm trying to go to both, what I noticed in conferences in general, you have the smaller regional ones, and obviously we have the two big ones, RSA and Black Hat. But you also have like B-sides that are sprinkled, around the country, and we have here one in Kansas City where I live, and ours is coming in September.
Hmm.
And one of the things I'm curious about is what I've seen is that specific people going to specific things. So to your point, maybe the VCs and the C levels or the head ofs or, kind of more, let's say, kind of management sometimes tend to go more to like RSAs and those types of conferences. And then the operators, I have seen them going either to Black Hat and or if you're part of the hacker community or consider yourself kind of more, closer to that community, Defcon, B-sides, things like that, which I find interesting. I try to go to both and to several of them, and unfortunately not all of them in the same year. But I will alternate. So like one year I will go to B-sides, one year I'm going to go to Defcon, one year I'm going to go to RSA and things like that. And the reason is I like to get perspective not just from my own group, not from my own circle, if you will, right? Because I think that's one of the challenges that we have within our industry. That the CISOs talk to the CISOs, and the operators talk to the operators, and the hackers talk to the hackers. But do they really talk to each other?
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't. Because I was once asked, like, "You're a CISO. What are you doing here at Defcon?" Well, I like to see the hackers. I like to see the creativity. I like to see the new things. Like, oh, that's actually really interesting. I mean, how somebody presented this new approach or new things that they were doing. It makes me think about things that I need to consider for the future, new threats. Yeah, there are a lot of things that are like not interesting, but I mean, it really kind of gives the creativity. Is for me, it's kind of the biggest thing that I see in that, right? And getting that perspective. And I'm curious, have you experienced the same? Have you experienced that siloism between groups?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'll split it. I see 3 circles in a Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm.
There's operators, there's
Mm-hmm.
executives, and there's
Mm-hmm.
vendors. Let me
Mm-hmm.
hypothesize those three. And I've been in all three roles. So as an operator, as an individual contributor, those sessions were really good for motivating me. To me, learning is fun. It's enjoyable. In my
Mm-hmm.
downtime, I'll learn. And so going to those sessions where there were people that they'd written the book, they'd wrote the tool, and so go right to the source, immensely valuable, largely because it was fun, right? It
Mm-hmm.
inspired thinking in me and new ways of looking at problems. And even if I would take classes that had no direct practical bearing on my day-to-day job, but I got direct practical value on my day-to-day job from those classes. So that was my opinion as an operator. But often in those operator classes, there would be a discussion among the members of the class that, man, I wish I could really do this. There's no way my CISO is going to buy off on this. There's just they don't see the value in this. They're focused on things like there's the little bit of that blue collar versus white collar, right, conversation.
Right.
As an executive, going to conferences, I prefer the operator classes. It is my opinion that the courses, presentations, and seminars offered to executives, specifically marketed to executives,
Mm-hmm.
are never worth the time. I struggle to think of an executive-directed course offered at a security conference that has yielded value to me that I couldn't have got from reading the slides in 5 minutes. And I realize now that third Venn diagram, as a vendor, doing some of these presentations, too often you're trying to be a thought leader. And I really don't like that adjective. I don't like that proper noun, thought leader, because it has the sense of the person rushing to get in front of the parade to pretend like they're leading it. And there's a please acknowledge me desperation, not to individuals, but to that title, right? Thought leader. I honestly think a thought explorer, a thought critiquer, a thought reassessor, those are much more valuable to me. And when, on the few occasions I've been able to listen to someone who had my job talk about, so I was so this happened at Mandiant's conference, closed door session, so I'll leave names and et cetera out of it. But there was a
Mm-hmm.
CISO there who had been at a major institution during a major breach. And that person walked through, this is what we missed. This is what we should have done. This is what we did about it. This is who we brought in. And this is what I should have done differently. And this is what I missed and emphasized on. And I'm sure that was titled a thought leadership session, but it was really not. It was really a thought retrospective. And that to me is extremely valuable. So, operator, executive, now when I go to vendor, one of the difficulties as a vendor is when you look at what's out there for vendor presentations, because this is your cohort, right? So vendors since the 1960s in security have been talking in a certain way. And the way that they talk is all the problems that matter to you, my dear audience, are solved by my product.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not ever true. And despite the fact we sell software to solve a problem that we think is urgent, important, and valuable, tools aren't the answer. There's people issues and process issues that really, if you solve those, that's your Pareto investment. So when we, as a vendor, do presentations, it is my mission that that presentation is received by the participants as, I would have paid for this. This is worth it to me. I would have paid for this. And certainly this is part of our marketing budget. So absolutely, I'm not ashamed to talk about Lucidum and the value we deliver, discovering your unknowns and automatically protecting them. See, I snuck that in. But that's going to be that much. And the rest is, how do I use the MITRE attack frame to negotiate budget with IT and my CFO? Or how do I communicate risk to a board? What do I do in my first 90 days? Very much the topics that you and I talk about. Because golden rule, right? That's the kind of presentation I wished that I had received from vendors.
And
So that's my essay answer to your true false question.
no, which I think it's extremely important and valuable because and that I want to take it in several different ways. First of all, I mean, if we expand that, I like very much what you said about thought explorer, because I think, leader is not something that you take for yourself. It's something that is bestowed upon you by somebody else, right? I mean, if people don't believe in you, you can lead all you want, but if nobody follows, you're not a leader.
Army of one.
Exactly, right? So ultimately, as a leader, I mean, you're in service to others. And as a service to others, how do you do and what do you do in order for them to enable them, to support them, to lead them? But ultimately, it's for them to choose to follow you. If they don't choose to follow you, you're probably not a leader. But I want to take it a step further, because the explorer side of it, I think that's actually what helped you become that thought leader. Because if all you're doing, you're saying, okay, I'm just rehashing the exact same thing that all the generations hashed before me, which is nothing wrong with that. But are you a leader, or are you mostly
A
like a herder,
recapitulator, a summarizer?
maybe?
Yeah.
Yes, right. But I think the question is, like, as leaders, do we have the obligation to actually go and question some things at times? Not everything is wrong necessarily, but to actually question at times the status quo and say, okay, are we still going in the right direction? Has anything changed? Just the fact that we're following what is called, quote unquote, best practice.
Yeah.
What is best practice? Who decides that's whatever we do right now, it's a best practice? And even more than that,
Yeah.
how many best practices we know that used to be a best practice that over time stopped being a best practice?
Yeah.
So just blindly follow something because that's the best practice, for me, it's a cap out.
Yeah.
I think we have an obligation to actually think about it. And if it's still the good and the right things to do, yes, let's do it. But we always have to ask. So as a thought explorer, do you challenge those practices, or what we call best practices, right? And if yes, how do you present that?
That's right.
So
I think
what do you think about that?
I think that is crucial. I think if I could sum up the mission that you have to encourage other CISOs, it would be what you just said. That ability to look inward, to think back, and to ruminate, right? Like a cow with three stomachs chewing his cud and figure out, I guess a cow would not be a he, but we'll get back to that, and figure out what should I have done differently? What has changed in my environment? I think that is crucial. I love the epithet best practice, because we kind of really mean, good practice. And we never talk about what is best, what is great practice, what is
Mm-hmm.
better practice. Um, Best practice is a euphemism for, I think, I don't want to think about this. So this is best
Mm-hmm.
practice. I'm going to get a C on the exam. That's best
Right.
practice. And you don't know that until you ruminate on it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
to soften the nuance of my critique, I think there are areas, when I was a CISO, there were areas in my portfolio where best practice was good enough for now. So when
Mm-hmm.
I look at the breadth of portfolio offerings, I might and have considered what we're doing right now with red teaming. It's best practice. We'll get back to improving it later. What we're
Mm-hmm.
doing with our stock is best practice, and that ain't good enough. We need to get great practice there. What we're doing with GRC, that's been best practice so long it's stale. And there's a business advantage to improving what is best practice into what's good practice for us. So best practice to me feels like CMMI. Best practice is probably a 2. And there's places I want a 3, 4, or 5.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember I went the other day to Home Depot, and I was just looking to buy a lock for, we have a broken lock in the house, so I just needed to replace it.
I'm
And
a Lowe's man myself. Can we still be friends?
sure, absolutely. And then I asked the gentleman, like I said, hey, where is the aisle when I can find, handles lock? He's like, oh, it's aisle 10, and the order, there's There's good, better, and best.
Oh, you're right.
I'm like,
Right.
oh, that's interesting. So I went and checked, and they're all like, door handles with locks on them. They all function the same. They all have the same, outcome at the end of the day. But one is labeled good, the other one is labeled better, and the third one is labeled best.
And the
So I
green, the
spent
blue,
more
and the black
time,
stickers on them.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I spent time actually looking into what is good, what is better, what is considered best by whomever decided and labeled them as such. And by looking at all that data, I actually had to make a conscious decision of like, okay, is good enough for me, or do I actually go for the better, or I actually spend the extra money to go for what is considered best? And I don't feel that we do that much in our profession because we're always trying to go for the best practice. And maybe there are cases where the good enough practice is just good enough.
Or where best has been mislabeled and it's actually good.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So when you mention aisles, as I was meeting people at Black Hat and asking them, why are you at Black Hat? What do you hope
Mm-hmm.
to accomplish, and what's your plan to accomplish it? Somebody asked me, how would you approach the floor? So there was a guy, two guys walking around, and they were looking to assess the state of cybersecurity technology, one, and two, to look
Mm-hmm.
for things that were new and innovative that were
Mm-hmm.
there. And they asked me, how would you approach this? And I wonder what you think about my suggestion. I said, I would approach this the way a dietitian recommends you approach a supermarket. The dietitian tells you, stay away from the middle of the store and stick to the edges. And the edges is where the butcher is. The edges is the produce. The edges is dairy. And I think at Black Hat, the highly processed, unhelpful food is in the center, and the healthy food is at the edges. Now that's self-serving because we were near the edge.
But that's actually a very interesting thought, and I think it's a very good analogy as well, because when usually you will find the innovation, it's going to be at the edge with the smaller produce, with the smaller farmers who are just going to bring you the only thing that they are focused and specialized in. And they give you their best because that's all they have,
Yeah.
as opposed to the processed food in the middle that optimize for something different. Like, so the farmers at the edge, I mean, they optimize perhaps for recognition, perhaps for growth, perhaps for some level of innovation and creating something new. Where the products in the middle, I mean, they process for efficiency, and therefore, maybe cutting some or changing some of the ingredients, or perhaps doing some other things that maximize maybe profits or right. I mean, so I think that's a very, very good analogy.
Yeah, the processed food in the middle tends to have a lot of artificial sweeteners as well. So we could probably run this analogy pretty hard.
Yeah, I would agree. But one a friend once told me that you can go and eat at the best restaurant every day, like take like the best lobster and the best steak, and have like a huge surf and turf meal that is this really special like lobster from that one fisherman from Maine that actually have this practice in the family for like 120 years of how they get this specific type of lobster and get it all the way to you fresh. And that's also his neighbor who is actually have the farm with the cows that kind of grow up in a certain way, and and it costs a lot, and it's very specialized and it's high
Mm,
quality, but still from time to time I just want a burger.
that's
So
right. It feels like good, better, best practice as well. Sometimes you want a burger.
yeah.
Yeah. So we had, not to rub salt in your wound,
Hmm.
we had a number of good get-togethers with members of SVCI. And
Hmm.
if you're watching and you're not familiar with SVCI, go to www.svci.io. And we had a dinner with many folks together, and there were several ad hoc gatherings. And it was really good, Yaron. We all got together at RSA, but the environment was different, right? We were there to listen to a presentation. There was a cocktail hour. There was milling around. And there was an enormous advantage to breaking us up into 5 tables, all in the same back room, and having deeper conversations with folks. It was valuable. It was warming. And in fact, one of the CISOs that you know, Clint Maples at Robert Half, he and I were talking before going to Black Hat, and we were reflecting on the RSA event, and we reflected that, you know, at RSA, we all kind of got together, and because maybe it was the first time out of the chute being in public together, all of our conversations were, so what are you doing now, and how do you like your job, and how's it going with work? And that's just an icebreaker, right? And so we thought, wow, if we're going to spend all our time doing icebreakers again, we're not going to be able to connect with people in the friendship bonding style that we really want. And so we talked, and I brought with me Uno cards, and our plan was we're going to pass out decks of Uno cards and get people playing because it takes your mind off the icebreaker, and now you can talk about real stuff. But as it happened, we were all seated at tables, and it was away from the cacophony of the main restaurant. And so it was low and slow and gentle, and people talked about a lot of stuff. It was really, really nice to get together and talk more on a personal level. And you were missed often and volubly.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And this is, for me, that's one of the biggest things I find extremely valuable in conferences is that connection with the people, is the connection with my fellow CISOs, from other companies. Some of them, new to the profession or to the role. Some of them are veterans of, maybe their second, third, fourth, sometimes even more, times as a CISO. And it's always interesting, and you always learn something when you go and talk to somebody else, no matter if, that's their first role or maybe that's their fifth role. You
That's right.
always learn something. And that's, for me, it's probably the biggest value I see in a lot of those conferences, beyond just the, okay, yeah, what's new out there, new technologies, but also what people are talking about.
That's right.
How do you guys, what happened, what changed, over the last, year or 2 or 3, especially, after we've been disconnecting for some time, coming back and getting, people change roles, people moved, people more working from home. We have a new set of challenges and problems. Getting that perspective, for me, is like one of the biggest things, that the most valuable thing in going to conferences.
I agree.
And it makes me think, because one thing that on the somewhat negative side is that a lot of these conferences for us becoming more and more of an echo chamber. So, the security people are talking to the security people. And, we all complain about the same things of, how engineers don't want to use security, and how the executives don't get it, and how we don't have enough money, and we don't have enough people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? To some extent, different levels.
Sure.
But I wish there was a place, and maybe there is, I'm just familiar with it, but I wish there was a place where security people and finance people and HR people and marketing people can all get together and really have these conversations. Even I would say, like vulnerable conversations, and say, look, how do you look at this problem? How do you think about it? So it's not just kind of talking within our own silos, but talk between the silos.
That's
and I
really
haven't found a place like that.
So I would want CIOs, CTOs, CFOs, the folks you mentioned, head of DevSecOps. How would you organize that? If you had 5 companies get together and they each brought those folks, that might be valuable. Then you've got the silo of we're all in the same vertical, maybe. But that might be the next barrier to break down. How would you do that? How would you motivate that? That's an interesting outcome. Would you start small? A tech conference that's CIO, CTO, CISO. What do you think about that?
I would probably start small, because for me, it's one of those things that, in order for a lot of these very, very smart people to feel comfortable enough and be vulnerable to come and say, look, I'm a security person and I have no idea what that CFO person talk about. I have no idea about all these terms that they're throwing around like EBITDA and I don't know what it is.
Or
And
to
I
have
have
the
no
CISO
idea
say that
how,
about a CISO.
right?
Like, yeah,
Exactly. Right. I don't know how do I connect this EBITDA thing that they're talking about to my security practice. And then you flip that and you say, you know, this is so, and I know that they're trying their best, and I know they have all the good intentions in heart. But man, when they come and talk about this, MITRE attack,
yeah,
it sounds like a disease to me. I
yeah,
thought, is that a new plague? Like, what do I do with that? Right. So I think there's an opportunity because I think there are a lot of concepts that not only we share, but we also need to educate each other and build those connections and build those bridges for us to ultimately function better together.
yeah, yeah.
And we need to learn from each other, right? I had a conversation at some point in my career with a lady from finance. And, we hallway conversation and we got to talk about risk. And she asked, like, so how do you guys think about risk, like, from a security perspective? And I walked through a couple of examples. And she said, wow, that's actually not different than how we think about risk from a financial perspective.
Oh, really?
We kind of look at those kind of external threats and internal threats and pressures or whatnot, right? We may call them a little bit something really different. We may quantify them a little bit different, but conceptually, I think about it in a very similar way. We had a lovely conversation. And I'm like, I wish there was more of those conversations that you can say, oh, okay, that actually now makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Maybe there's opportunity here. If somebody wants to kind of pick up that and create a new conference that hopefully doesn't cost $6,000, per ticket, but that we can have those conversations better.
so upcoming in this year, there is Sumo Logic's conference.
Mm-hmm.
There is Splunk's conference. There's AWS reInvent towards the end of the year. When you look at what is popular in terms of a conference schedule, what's on your list that's interesting and why?
So for me, kind of, if I rank them in the conferences throughout the year, for me, it's, at least in my head, it's usually I prioritize them based on where do I have the biggest opportunity to connect with the community. So if it's
Mm-hmm.
RSA or it's Black Hat or something else, and depend on which community, right? But that's where usually I will prioritize. Um, if it's things that are more local that don't require travel or long travel, so even if I can get in my car and take a day off and drive 2, 3, 4 hours, to a local or regional nearby B-sides or whatever, I love to do that because again, it's always for me like meet new people, see new
Yeah,
ideas,
yeah,
a lot of interesting things that kind of popping up here and there. So a lot of those regional one, a lot of those kind of regional ones. Um, but it's becoming hard to decide between an RSA and a Black Hat and and a Splunk and an AWS. It's hard, I mean, to decide which one to go to. Um, these conferences are getting pretty good, and you're seeing a lot of the same people. I mean, yeah, each one of them has its own, different perspective or whatnot. But yeah, it's hard. It's really, really difficult.
yeah. I like your primary criteria. That's pretty valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Excellent. So, as a last little bit,
Mhm.
suppose I am new in my security career. I've got 2 to 5 years in security. And it might be GRC, it might be as a SOC analyst. I've got very limited experience, but this is my passion and this is where I'm going to grow. If I could get permission to attend one conference, which one would you send me to and why?
That's a fantastic question. I would say go to B-sides.
Hmm.
And here's why. it's not going to be very expensive one.
Mhm.
So potentially you may be able to afford to go to more than one,
I
as
see how
opposed to
your argument
paying
goes.
like,
Your
you
first wish
know,
for the genie is for more wishes, isn't it?
yes. Yes. So, because the bigger conference are gonna cost you like 2-3 grand. I mean, just or whatever, 1,500 to 3 grand. I mean, just for the ticket plus all accommodation. It's gonna be pretty expensive. You're gonna eat the whole budget maybe for the year, right? Um, but I would go with the local, especially if I have an early career. I will go to the local one, and I will try to go to the local ones that, although B-Sides was started as an offshoot of kind
Mhm.
of Black Hat DEFCON ish, in Vegas. But I think it started with the mission of let the community pay it back and educate, the other members in the community. So what I've seen in B-Sides, I have seen talks and I have seen people coming not just for, okay, DEF CON, it's just the hackers, or just, I'm going for after hacking stuff.
Right.
Or, RSA, it's more maybe general practitioners or whatnot. Um, I've seen more variety in smaller places. And start there, talk to people, learn from them. And then maybe over time go to like the bigger ones when you can actually now interact maybe more with the vendors. You can interact maybe with some VCs, with bigger companies, other people, from different companies. That's how would I start.
Yeah.
What do you think? How would you do it?
So I can't think of a better answer than that for those reasons. If you ended up going to, what used to be DerbyCon or ShmooCon or any of those, I think number one, you would get the technical insight that's valuable to you. But number two,
Mhm.
you don't get the community piece. And I love the
Mhm.
idea of the regional or local B-sides because I don't think you should go to conferences for training alone. And part of that's my
Mhm.
bias. I train better when I'm not with a bunch of other people because then I can go as fast as I want. Or if there's something interesting or difficult, I can go as slow as I want. So I can do my own pace. I love that. So I wouldn't go to conferences for the course. But if you go to a conference, the one thing you can ensure you can get is a stronger network. And
Mhm.
you really don't get that at RSA. You don't get that. You don't receive that, and you can't build that at these conferences. You and I have been talking about the fact I like going to RSA because I've already got those friends, and
Right.
that's where we can physically reconnect. You with Black Hat, you miss it because you've already got those friends, and that's where you can physically reconnect. But if I'm 2 to 5 years in my career, all of my contacts are from class or from work. And what I really
Mhm.
need is people that have 4 to 7 years experience that I can talk to personally and get to know, and even away from class, ask tips, tricks, mentorship, insights, etc. So I think that's where I'd start. Um, I think you're right. I cannot think of a better answer. That's really good, Yaron.
So now let's flip that. Let's flip it for a second because I think there's also an aspect to the conferences themselves that maybe the conferences do us, I mean, they do us a lot of good, but maybe they're also hurting us and themselves in a way. So we talked a lot about, or we talked a little bit about before about thought leadership and how do we explore new thoughts? How do we maybe challenge, I mean, some best practices or whatnot?
Yeah.
So I will admit, I've been submitting talks to Black Hat for the last probably 5 years, maybe. Um, because one of the things I wanted to kind of check box for myself is like I spoke at Black Hat. I think it's a cool conference. I spoke at RSA twice. I also want to speak at Black Hat. So I'm submitting talks to Black Hat over the last 5 years, both to the European one and the US one, and I failed each and every time. I was never accepted. My talk was never accepted to Black Hat. And even talks that I sent, to some other conferences, like InfoSec World, or like places like that, right? Oh, sorry, Secure World,
Right.
and talks that I got a great feedback from people. I'm like, oh, if I try something here in a more, let's say, local setting, and the feedback I'm getting, is pretty good, I want to take it to kind of more bigger setting because I want to increase the audience and have that conversation perhaps with a bigger audience, right? I fail.
Hmm.
So I was reflecting back and I was asking some people, say, okay, well, what am I doing wrong?
Hmm.
And I think a lot of the feedback I received was, well, your talks are not very much a hacker talk, if you will. You're not talking about a new exploit. You're not talking about a new way to do something, to break something or something like that. Your talks are more, hey, let's rethink this problem, which, as they label them or classify them, as kind of more of a thought leadership talk,
Yeah.
or we'll call it thought exploration for talk. And these types of talks are not for the black hat crowd, which is kind of interesting to me because, again, we're going back to our echo chambers, to our silos. And this is not a plea or ask for me to go and speak at black hat. This is more, I'm thinking about, are we doing this service to ourselves when we create those only hacker conference or only CISO conference or only, GRC conference? Are we going to be better off having and flipping that and allowing multiple ways to bring those people together, again, because we can all learn from each other?
So, Black Hat's a business. And I reflect on your earlier comment about the perimeter aisles of the supermarket, the perimeter aisles of Black Hat. And one of the comments you made is they are at the perimeter laser focused on one bit of value.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's possible. Black Hat's a business. They're in the business of selling vendor space. They do that by attracting ticket revenue, and their ticket revenue has been hurting in the last 3 years. And it's possible then that in order to get, and the second thing that's hurting Black Hat's marketing, that's hurting Black Hat's brand, is Black Hat is really just RSA in the desert. What you want to go to are B-sides and Defcon on either side of it. That's really what you want to go to for your hacker summer camp. So with that pressure on brand dilution, with a likely decrease in revenue, I could see their assertion being, let's double down on as technical as possible. Because Black Hat's goal isn't a better InfoSec community. Their goal is revenue. And I don't mean that they could care less about the InfoSec community. It's just, if you got to pick one goal, that's their goal.
Right.
So this did occur to me. You could present in a response to their call for papers about rooting Intel's new unreleased chip. And then when you go and present, make your actual presentation about how to attract attention to presentations to get your budget through in an enterprise. And call it social engineering, not lying.
You know what? We should try it next time. I'll try to submit.
We'll have to
Routing
delay the
super
release
secret, right?
of this video cast
Yes.
a year from now.
Well, just kind of wait for a couple of years until people forget it, then we'll try it again and see how it
Well,
goes.
and listen, if presenting at Black Hat's on your bucket list, I gotta say, presenting at Black Hat and getting thrown out has got to be.
Oh, that's even better, right? Okay, yes.
There it is.
I probably need to rethink how are we going to make the ultimate climax of presenting or not presenting in the conference.
Right?
And then,
Right? The only man banned from Black Hat is my friend. Yeah.
There you go.
Say, if you need other help improving life goals, I am here.
Please, by all means, absolutely, yeah. And then, the worse they are, the better we are, I guess. So yeah, let's seriously think about that. Yes.
Well, Yaron, thank you for taking time and doing this. For those of you watching, please like this episode and subscribe. So as we release new episodes, you'll be notified. And in the comments, give us pushback. What conferences did we miss? What would you recommend differently to that 2 to 4 year experienced cybersecurity professional? And what's your favorite conference and why? Thank you for joining us. I'm Joel Fulton.
I'm Yaron Levi. And together,
we are JaY Walkin.
Always a pleasure.